Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Soccer Scene 34th episode with myself, Noel, and Noel O'Connor. Noel, we've plenty to get through this evening as we enter the closing stages of the season. First of all, we'll reflect on the game between Treaty United and Galway United in the Airtricity League last week. The wait goes on, Noel, for Treaty United to gain a first victory against Galway. They were all so close on Friday night, yet so far, I suppose. Now, we'll speak about the specifics about the controversy of maybe the penalty decision in a few minutes. But, you know, looking at it on paper, another positive performance against a team in a higher position than you in the table, and a fairly thoroughly entertaining game despite the low score.
Definitely one of the best games I've been at, certainly this year. There was a really good atmosphere there as well. It's funny that I made a sprinkling of what I call the Cork Mafia, the Cork City Mafia there, as well, as Cork City had no game and they suddenly became Treaty fans for the night, because obviously if Treaty had got the 3 points on Friday night, it would have made Cork City champions as well. So on one side of me, I had the Cork City Mafia, and the other side I had the Galway United chairman. So it certainly was a very interesting game, both on and off the pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. It does seem like you had an interesting evening, to be fair. And it got very interesting, Noel. Obviously, Treaty, went into a lead early on in the Curran again. Fantastic finish, in super form, hard to stop at the moment. And then just as it looked like Treaty had, closed out the game with relative ease, to be fair. I mean, John Caulfield threw everyone on, all strikers to try and get the goal back. Referee Mark Moynihan gives what I certainly didn't believe, Noel, was a penalty on first view, and I still don't think it was a penalty that needed to be given on second viewing. It infuriated Treaty, obviously, and delighted Galway, but Stephen Walsh tucked away the penalty. What was your own view of the penalty decision, Noel?
This is not the Arsene Wenger line, no, that I didn't see it, but certainly on the stand side, you're a good bit away from it. And just like it did seem that the Galway player, was kicked. Now, it felt that he put his leg in there to be kicked, like, if you like, that he was playing for the penalty. And look, you see that as well. Obviously some decisions are going to go against you, and you'll be disappointed, because what really would frustrate Treaty on the night was the 2 unbelievable saves that Conor Kearns had made, maybe particularly in the first half, where if they'd been 2 goals up, which they probably on balance deserved to be 2 goals up, I thought. But when you're a goal up, and look, you only have to go back and look at Galway's record about, playing to the end. And even if they hadn't got that penalty, it would be hard to bet against them that they wouldn't have manufactured an equaliser from something else, such as what they've done, more or less every game this season. But probably a bit harsh. Some referees may give it and possibly, I've heard it could have been a free out as well, but that's maybe how it goes in games, because I was told by the Galway contingent at the start of the game that the same referee hates John Caulfield. He's a Cork referee and he hates John Caulfield, and they've got nothing off him all season. And there you go, they get a soft penalty on this one. So it's never a case of, referees against you or for you, whatever. Look, sometimes they just don't get it right.
Yeah, it's a funny one, Noel, because from the viewing, it's actually my fault you didn't get it. I was supposed to send you on the replay of this penalty decision, which I forgot about. But from the replay, which you can see, what you can see really is Wilson Mueru maybe shaping up to take a shot for the bones of 2 seconds, which is quite a long time when you're swinging your leg back. Mark Ludden manages to get his left foot onto the ball, kind of nip it away from Mueru, and Mueru kicks the back of Ludden's calf. You hear some people saying that he's been impeded from taking a shot, and then on the other argument, I suppose you have some people saying that, well, how does it take that long for him to swing his leg back and take a shot? I suppose which side of it would you land on?
I suppose, look, it depends on the referee's angle. Sometimes if the referee hasn't seen for me, I always look at if the defender makes contact with the ball first. If the defender makes contact with the ball first, for me, look, it's never a penalty. I'm not so sure what referees look for now, or what they see, and sometimes even if they do understand what a foul actually is. So look, from that point, I'm sure there'll be a grieved Treaty, but at the end of the day, they'd won that game, would have made a huge difference we're talking about confidence. I don't think they certainly lack any confidence at the moment. I think they're really at the top of their game. There's no expectation on them, and maybe they might be better off to save that first win, on one of those playoff nights, which looks like it's likely that they will be playing Galway United in the playoffs.
Absolutely, and we will move on to that as well in a couple of minutes, Noel. But because you were talking about maybe what referees are looking for and the standard of refereeing, I know that maybe you would have had some personal gripes with referees back in your own day, maybe when you were manager of Wexford and Limerick FC back in the day, and obviously involved with Cork. I assume you had run-ins with a few over the years, but there seems to be between supporters, maybe, I know you have the Twitterati, as they call it, people getting on the backs of certain referees. Managers have obviously been critical this year, I thought, particularly at the start. What's your own verdict, Noel? Has there been improvement since your time in the refereeing standard in League of Ireland, or is it very much similar?
To be honest with you, I don't think so. I think I've made this comment more than once, particularly in terms of Premier referees. I've seen some Premier referees say this year, and I've said to myself, geez, I remember when he was a bad referee in the first division, and now he's refereing in the Premier League. So I think, look, it's obviously a difficult job. These lads seem to be very young. I'm not quite sure how they're coached, for want of a better word, in terms of how they make those kind of decisions that they have to make. And we have to remember it's really difficult for them as well. And in terms of that, I often think, are they better to get maybe some ex-players involved in that side of the coach and the referees? I think it would be a help. But listen, however bad we think they are, they're the best of what's there, I presume, for senior soccer, and that's where we are, and it's not something that'll be solved overnight or anything. Obviously, the more training or coaching that goes into these guys and the more experience they get, it should follow that. They should get better. But overall, I think my own experiences over a season, what happened on Friday night can happen you, and the next night you may well get a soft one yourself. I don't say that it particularly balances out. I've heard that it may not balance out over a season, but certainly you'll find yourself getting a nice decision and not getting one as the season goes on.
From discussions, what feels like many moons ago now with Tommy Barrett, he feels the same, that decisions may not balance themselves out over the season, like many say. But speaking of the treaty manager, Noel, you would refer to it that it looks likely, barring, a Galway collapse as such and Waterford overtaking them now to get second, that it will be Galway and Treaty, fifth versus second over the two legs in the playoff. Do you think, especially in the last two games where they've got a 1-1 draw and a 0-0 draw name in DC Park, do you think that Tommy Barrett now has seen enough to think that, there is a very big possibility that his side could prevail in the encounter against Galway over two legs?
I think so, and it's not only the games against Galway. I think overall, I said it last week, with the form, you mentioned Enda Kern, and, I think it's his 18th goal of the season. The fact that they're not conceding too many goals, like they're in a situation now where, I don't think they'll fear anyone. And I think that it would be impossible to call that, particularly over two legs, because the goals seem to be drying up in those games as well. The fact that Treaty seemed to put Galway under a lot of pressure in terms of set plays, particularly in the first half with the long throws and the corners. It was very on Galway, like I thought. I thought Conor Kearns flapped it a few as well and was caught, kind of in no man's land. And normally you see when that happens, then it's kind of back to the drawing board and, you go back to your basics and you obviously try and iron that out. And that'll be top of the Galway United to-do list, I'd say, when they're getting ready for the playoff game. If it obviously goes with Treaty, I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussions about Enda Kearns or Mark Ludden's long throws and, the deliveries and picking the players up. It looks to me that it's going to be really tight and cagey affair and a real game of cat and mouse. And I would say this, I spoke to Conor McCormack after the game. I think he was a big loss to Galway because the way they set themselves up, he's the guy that breaks up the counter-attacks, if you like. And Treaty were getting great joy in terms of their counter-attacks, particularly in the first half, because there was no one to snuff them out at source. He's actually picked up a bit of a virus and he actually lost 5 kilos. But in the next couple of weeks, he should be back, and I'm sure he will be back for the playoffs. He'll certainly make a big difference to them.
I don't know, Noel, if the Galway chairman concurred with you or even knew you said it, but you would have been happy enough that there was at least 5 or 6 Galway fans that I overheard leaving the ground that said if Mark Ludden and then the Kern were in their team, they might have been closer to Cork. Thought I was listening to you again.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to say it to the chairman, but I certainly have been saying it. We've been giving Tommy praise, particularly about his handling of Enda Kern, and he's obviously he has a certain type of a personality that maybe not every manager would warm to him in terms of, say, he's out of possession work. I noted that he spent many minutes of the game on Friday night in an offside position on the way back, which a lot of managers would, just kind of get a bit annoyed, I suppose. But I think the whole vibe of Treaty suits him, the fact that we're the underdogs and we're amateurs and, we've nothing to lose, and all that kind of feeds into the good vibes that are there at the moment. And, it's a great place to be, that lack of pressure, because I did get a sense from the chairman as well, and talking to John Caulfield after that, there's obviously pressure on those Galway lads. They're inside in the city and maybe they're getting a bit of stick. People would think that, we're full-time, we should win the league, but, it's just not that simple. And where it's probably a bit of a chore to them, to play at the moment, it certainly isn't a chore for Treaty to play. And you could see the difference in the vibes of the two teams. So certainly that would be a big advantage to Treaty going into these games, because there's no doubt about it, there will be massive pressure on Galway United. I think particularly at home to do well, and people would look at it and think that they should be Treaty fairly easy on paper, but that's not how it works. And certainly, as we started out with the likes of Enda Kern and Mark Ludden, would certainly been a huge addition to Galway United's promotion push this year. But I'm sure Tommy Barrett will mention the fact that Ed McCarthy and Killian Bruder are certainly two good recruits for them to help on their promotion push as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose slightly off topic, Noel, but I do remember when you were managing Limerick FC back in the day, it was the time that your future captain and former captain, as it was, Pat Purcell, that was playing with Waterford. And I remember he scored a penalty against yourselves in a League Cup victory one evening, and cupped his ears to the Limerick FC fans who might have been giving him a bit of stick. And I'm not sure if you noticed it, but it looked like when Enda Kern scored, he was thinking about going over to kind of give a bit to the Galway fans, and kind of stopped short and then just looked at the ball boy and pretended he was celebrating with him instead, because I suppose he didn't want it to bite him in the backside like it did with Paddy, who ended up back with Limerick only about 6 months later.
Yeah, and look, I'm sure there'll certainly be more than Galway United. Look at Enda Kern's services next year. It'll be interesting to see what way he approaches that, because he's 30 now and certainly had up to now probably failed to fulfill on his promise, if you like. He's certainly delivering on that now, and whether he's happy to play away, in a place that he seems to be very happy with, scoring goals, or maybe is tempted to go. And obviously there'll be probably contracts on the table as well. Whether he looks at it in terms of a financial decision, it'll be interesting to see.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there Ed McCarthy and Killian Bruder. Killian Bruder didn't have the best of first halves, and he was replaced at half time, Noel. But it's fair to say that Ed McCarthy, who showed glimpses at Treaty of being a very good player last year, surely the signs were there that he's benefiting from full-time football and training every day. Noel, he was a real live wire, I thought, on Friday night last.
Yeah, played well, full of running. I think actually that was something that kind of hampered Galway as well on Friday night. The fact that they carried the ball a bit too much, I felt that they needed to release the ball a lot quicker than they did, particularly with the way the Treaty play. When they get out of possession, they're very quick to get into that 10 behind the ball shape. And the more touches that the opposition take on the ball, well, then obviously the easier it is to get into those positions. But overall, seen him playing a few games this year, I think he's doing very well. He's obviously only a young chap, and certainly the training helps. But the fact that he's playing most weeks as well is where the real development is coming.
Yeah, there was a notable absentee in Conor McCormack for Galway. There was also a couple of notable absentees for Treaty. I don't believe that Callum McNamara's was serious, but on a different note, Dean George's injury, I was hearing through the grapevines from maybe a couple of his teammates and others that it could be medial ligament damage, Noel, with his knee. So, like, I mean, any injury like that at this stage of the season, if it is confirmed over the next couple of days, you'd imagine it'd be very hard to see Dean George coming back before the end of the season.
Yeah, and look, he'll be a big loss. We speak about Enda Kearns goals, but I think Dean George has 11 or 12 as well.
Yeah.
And certainly they've been the catalyst for the success this year. And, he'll be disappointed with, at least 3 really, really big games, if not more, coming up in the next, 5 or 6 weeks. But in fairness to Treaty, they've certainly done well on the injury front, particularly in the latter half of the season. And hopefully it's not as serious as people may think.
When you go through, you actually mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, and I took note of it, that no matter what, you're going to get a couple of injuries to key players between now and the end of the season. It'll probably happen at all the teams, maybe in the playoffs, which maybe might even itself out. But you look at the players in terms of maybe their influence on the dressing room that you wouldn't want to be missing. You've mentioned obviously Enda Kearns being your top scorer, being one. Mark Ludden, because of his leadership in the squad and seems to be highly respected, would be another one. But as you said, like Dean George would probably be right in there amongst that list on his form this season. So if there was one of 3 players that Tommy Barrett really wouldn't want to lose, I would have thought Dean George would be right up there.
Yeah, listen, he certainly would with his goals. You'd have to include the likes of Mark Walsh in that as well. I think
Sean
he's
Gibbons, maybe.
so unsung as well in terms of the upsurge in the season. If he'd missed most of the first half of the season as well, we were kind of waiting for him to come back in and see where he would. And he's come back in like he didn't miss a game. He didn't even take a few games to get going. He's hit his high standards straight away. And like certainly, if you're looking at an unsung hero in that team in the last 5 or 6 weeks, he's got to be really high up in that list.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this week, Noel, they head to the RSC where Waterford United lie in wait. Now, Waterford play tonight as well. That game hasn't taken place yet against Longford, but in unbelievable form, Noel. I mean, we know about their FAI Cup exploits. They knocked out the likes of St. Patrick's Athletic. They beat Dundalk. Phoenix Patterson has shown the type of form that got him the Player of the Month in the whole Premier Division last season towards the end of the season. A really tough task for Tommy Barrett's side, and he did say it in his interview that when pushed on by the club PRO Michael Hearn that there is always a worry there, because if you do go and lose to an informed Waterford, and Wexford did win, it just drags it on for that extra week, and you do start to maybe sweat a little at the prospect of Wexford winning another game. Now I know Wexford have Cork, and you wouldn't be expecting it, but it could be tight. So even though there's no pressure on Treaty in the game, they'd love to just get, even a draw just to get that bit closer and edge away that bit closer to guaranteeing the playoffs.
Yeah, and look, there's a few imponderables there as well, and he's right. Probably if it was more likely, I thought that Wexford could have beaten Cork maybe if Galway had beaten Treaty and put that extra bit of pressure on Cork, and that hasn't happened. You'd have to fancy Cork to get the job done. And I think it's a difficult enough game on paper for Treaty, but then Waterford United have an FAI Cup semi-final coming, and they're kind of secure in their playoff position as well. So, we wonder what team that they will put out. Maybe they'll rest guys, for the Cup semi-final. So, and again tonight, they could have an injury or two, or maybe a sending off. So, all that'll play into what happens on Friday night. But either way, I think that's the one team that I think that Treaty have struggled against really in the league, certainly below in the RSC, and the second game in the Marcus Field. They really seem to struggle with their pace and their quick passing. Like, they weren't carrying the ball like Galway United and giving them time to get into space. They were playing balls in behind the fullbacks and getting on them, and really quick interplay. And Treaty really struggle with it. But look, with the improvement that they've shown in the last few weeks, you expect them to improve as well. And it's probably another one of those games where if you ask both teams now, would they be happy with a point, they'd probably say yes. and you'd have to lean between everything that's happening and the fact that Waterford are playing tonight, that the most likely outcome is probably a draw, which I think all parties will be happy with.
I get the impression, Noel, as well, that, well, you are, I know you are, and I definitely am, I suppose, disappointed with Waterford in a sense, or because I know me and yourself, when Jason O'Connor had been on the podcast, we both had Waterford, I believe, to win the league. And considering their shaky start to the campaign, they're now only 9 points off Cork City in the title race, which just shows you, I suppose, the type of run they'd been on, because I think they had been nearly 15 points behind at one stage, or something along those lines. So I suppose Waterford will be disappointed themselves to pick it up. But I'm just looking there, Noel, and obviously there's only 3 points between themselves and Galway now, as they come into the final 3 games. If you were Danny Searle and you were looking at it, would you see much difference between Longford and Treaty? Like, would you be pushing hard to get second place to maybe play Treaty, or would you be saying it really doesn't matter between Longford or Treaty, and if you're looking at it from their point of view?
I think at the moment, if I was any manager in the division, I would think that I prefer to meet Longford than Treaty with the form they're in, and the run they're on. I'm not so sure Waterford think that, because obviously they look at their own head-to-head against Treaty, which is pretty good. But maybe they look at it with a degree of confidence of beating Longford, and then say, well, listen, we kind of hope we get Treaty in the final on a one-off, because our record overall, bar the one where they went down to 10 men, after 30 minutes in the Marcus Field, has been really, really good. But I think they're a very, very, very good side, and they're a real strong contender, I think, to come through the playoffs and win it. And there'll certainly be a difficult opposition if they get that far for the likes of Finn Harps or UCD. But I still think that we won't learn a huge amount over the match on Friday, and maybe Tommy will, he'll probably look to make a few changes as well himself.
I was just actually going to ask you that question, Noel, because I assume if Callum McNamara is available, he'll probably go back in to the team now, because if it was something to do with an injury or rest, that he'll have that week behind him now as well. But maybe some thought, a bit surprisingly, Conor Melody was given a second start in a row after the Longford game against Galway. I thought he actually did quite well. It was one of his better performances, more positive performances, and he was denied by Kearns. He was one of those denied by Kearns a couple of times with really good saves. That's the only hope, I suppose, Noel, when we were talking about the likes of Dean George injuries, that maybe Conor Melody will burst onto the scene in the important games. There's some guys that do produce when you least expect it.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I thought he was really, really, really good. And if we go back to the last game, and the Kearns struggled a bit against Waterford, I think. And maybe it's a night to start success, and expect Water, to have a lot of the ball, and maybe for Treaty to play on the counter-attack, and maybe he needs another 90 minutes under his belt, because he probably will be needed, over the close proximity of the playoff games.
And would you be looking, Noel, at maybe like a player who's played 60 games for Treaty now, but obviously the one's 30 again this year and over, I think, Mark Ludden? Would you be, if you were Tommy, would you be I know you want continuity, but would you be looking at the likes of him once you've seen you've lost Dean George and saying, will I save him for a week?
No, I think, yeah. I think, when guys said it, when guys are on that run, I see him after the match as well. He's so influential around the group. You certainly and the fact that, they're not training maybe like they should, that if he missed those 90 minutes, well, then it would impact on his fitness as much as anything else. So the fact that he's getting those games in, is keeping him match fit. I don't see the point in leaving a guy like him out, particularly with only possibly 5 or 6 games left to go. So I would expect Mark Ludden to play.
Yeah, and just like Cork City, Noel, just like Cork City, Noel, last week, cheering on Treaty, I think the favour will be repaid this weekend, and that Treaty will be certainly hoping that they can. Maybe we're not hoping they'll win the league, even though we know they will. We're not hoping for that, but we'll be hoping that they can beat the opposition that they're playing against, and that we can finally maybe Copperfass and going into that semi-final, which we'll be looking at next week. Copperfass and that playoff position in going into that Derry City game on a high. So hopefully Treaty United can do that this week, and obviously we hope that we are discussing a positive result for Treaty. Hopefully they can look after their own business first, I'd imagine. But another big week for us next week, Noel, and I thank you once again for joining us. There was plenty to get through this evening, and also will be next week. So thank you, and we hope you can join